The courtroom was quiet, but the world outside was not, as flashes from cameras lit up the pavement, and murmurs filled the air. Blake Lively, once the symbol of poise and privacy, was suddenly the focus of a growing media firestorm, and it all started with a single line tucked inside a court document, a passing reference that changed everything. Because in that moment, Hollywood learned that during her deposition, Blake admitted something that no one saw coming. She said there was no explicit instruction to smear Justin Baldoni, and those words, those carefully chosen legal words, became the crack in the wall that so many have been waiting for. Some called it a confession, others called it a shield, but everyone agreed it was the twist that changed the game, because now this is no longer just a legal dispute. It is a war over narrative, over image, over what happens when silence no longer protects you, and the truth no longer hides behind closed doors. For months, fans and commentators have speculated about what really happened between these two stars, what secrets were kept, what stories were sold, and who pulled the strings. And now finally we have something real, something concrete. A sworn statement from Blake herself, and while she may think those words clear her name, they might just ignite something bigger. Because the public is watching, the media is circling, and every line in that deposition is now a spark, and we are about to see what happens when fire meets reputation, when the quiet walls of legal procedure give way to the noise of public judgment. This is not just a story about two celebrities, this is about power, perception, and the price of silence, and it starts with a single sentence that slipped through the cracks and into the spotlight. Blake Lively sat in that quiet courtroom chair, with cameras outside flashing like lightning, and inside the silence louder than the storm beyond the courthouse, and what slipped out into the document filing has now set off waves through Hollywood, through the media, and through anyone watching this unfolding drama. Because what was once tightly sealed has now found its way into the public record. And while the official transcript may remain behind closed doors, a reference in a procedural motion has revealed just enough to light the fire again. According to a court filing entered late last week, Blake Lively under oath admitted there was never a direct instruction to launch any smear campaign, and that moment right there, that line has ignited the narrative anew. Those looking for vindication have grabbed hold of it, and those defending her are scrambling to contextualize it, because the line suggests something no one expected, not from someone with this level of strategic silence and carefully curated public image. And yet here it is in a court document, referenced so briefly but loaded with consequence. A single sentence suggesting that despite months of speculation, of whispers, of leaked texts and insider testimonies, the actress may have confessed under oath that there was no explicit attempt, no orchestrated operation, no point-by-point takedown effort directed at Justin Baldoni. And yet if that's the truth, then what does it mean for the entire arc of this case? Because Baldoni's entire defamation claim was structured around the idea that coordinated efforts took place behind the scenes to dismantle his image, his credibility, his standing in Hollywood, and now Lively herself may have thrown that entire narrative into disarray. It's the type of twist that only escalates the spectacle surrounding this legal war, and what makes it even more remarkable is the way this detail emerged, not through a press conference or a media leak, but quietly nestled in a filing that most wouldn't notice unless they were looking closely. And someone was looking very closely, because within hours legal analysts had picked up on the reference, dissected it, and thrown it into the mainstream conversation, and the internet, as always, wasted no time reacting. Some took to social platforms with immediate takes suggesting that this was proof of innocence. Others argued that an admission of no explicit instruction does not mean no wrongdoing occurred, and others even speculated whether this was a carefully crafted way to create plausible deniability and shift the burden of proof entirely. And all of it circles back to the same core question: what really happened behind the scenes between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? What was said, what was orchestrated, and what, if anything, crossed the legal line between harsh criticism and defamation? And more importantly, who else was involved? Were their publicists, lawyers, mutual friends caught in the crossfire, or willingly playing roles? And if Lively's deposition testimony is now being used as leverage within the court, it may only be a matter of time before the full content becomes public, or is used more directly in motions to dismiss, or in strategic leaks. And if that happens, then we are no longer just watching a legal battle. We're witnessing the collapse or redemption of a Hollywood reputation in real time. And with each filing, each line in the document, we get closer to the truth, or at least the version of the truth each side wants to tell. Because for all the careful public relations plays and strategic silence, once something is in the court record, even obliquely, it becomes part of the permanent story. And in this case, that story just took a sharp, unexpected turn, one that neither side may have fully prepared for. Because while Justin Baldoni's legal team has spent months building a case around the notion of a coordinated takedown, this tiny sentence, this fragment of a statement threatens to unravel their central premise, at least on the surface. And yet legal minds know that an admission of no explicit directive is not necessarily a free pass. It opens a new front in the legal strategy and invites even deeper questioning about how actions were interpreted, how words were exchanged, and how reputations were affected. And so while the world watches the headlines scream and social media buzzes, the lawyers are now preparing their next move, perhaps more cautious now that this information is out. Perhaps emboldened to force even more disclosures, because with every leak, every procedural motion, this case drips more into the public consciousness, and Blake Lively, for all her attempts to control the narrative, is now fully exposed in the most uncomfortable spotlight. The kind that doesn't fade between takes or go away when the cameras stop rolling. And as more people comb through every filing, every motion, every sentence in this growing archive of courtroom drama, the pressure mounts not just for the legal teams, but for the public figures themselves, because in Hollywood, perception is currency. And once it begins to shift, there is no script to fix it, no role to hide behind, no performance that can override reality, even when that reality comes from a single quiet line in a sea of court documents. Now, as the legal world digests what Blake Lively's courtroom confession might actually mean, the conversation around Hollywood's most unexpected legal feud keeps shifting. Because what initially looked like a straightforward defamation suit has now become a labyrinth of conflicting narratives, incomplete evidence, and depositions that read more like plot twists than sworn statements in the latest filings. Attorneys referencing the deposition clearly intended to build a technical argument about liability and burden of proof, yet in doing so they accidentally, or perhaps strategically, let slip that Blake Lively may have admitted under oath that she never told anyone to launch a smear campaign directly. And this detail is huge because so much of the speculation surrounding her feud with Justin Baldoni relied on the idea that she had been working behind the scenes to manipulate press contacts or industry allies to isolate him, damage his career, or destroy his reputation. But if her testimony says otherwise, then everything else is suddenly on shaky ground. And still, the phrase "no explicit instruction" is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because even if she didn't say the words herself, were there implications, were there expectations or silent approvals that made others act in her interest without formal directives? And that question alone could become the centerpiece of the next courtroom argument. Because while courts care about explicit action, they also examine intent and consequence, especially when reputational damage is at stake. And that's where Justin Baldoni's team could shift strategy, perhaps leaning on digital evidence, circumstantial communications, or patterns in media behavior that suggest a coordinated effort even without a central command. And in Hollywood, this isn't far-fetched, because reputations aren't always destroyed by press releases. Sometimes it's the whispers, the nudges, the slow exclusion from circles, or the headlines that mysteriously drop at just the wrong time. And if those tactics can be linked to Blake Lively even loosely, the narrative may remain compelling enough for a jury to consider. And meanwhile, the public is stuck in a different kind of courtroom, the court of opinion, where reactions are faster, more emotional, and less interested in the technical details of defamation law. People are drawing lines between fandoms, industry loyalties, and social values, and everyone has a theory about what really happened. Some believe Blake is being unfairly targeted by a legal system weaponized against women in power. Others believe she's finally being held accountable for the kind of influence that usually escapes scrutiny. And still others think this entire drama is a symptom of a broken industry, where behind-the-scenes behavior finally collides with public accountability. But no matter which side you're on, the undeniable truth is this moment marks a turning point, not just in the legal case, but in the broader story of how celebrities use and lose power. Because Blake Lively's name being tied to a court document that hints at manipulation, even if technically cleared of wrongdoing, opens the floodgates for interpretation. And in Hollywood, interpretation often becomes reality, because the narrative is everything. It decides who gets cast, who gets dropped, who gets called, and who gets avoided. And for someone like Lively, whose brand has long been defined by control, elegance, and discretion, this moment represents a serious crack in the image. Even if her lawyers spin it as exoneration, it doesn't erase the fact that now the world knows there was a deposition, and that something in it was important enough to sneak its way into a public filing, which means it won't go away. The press will keep digging, the public will keep speculating, and Baldoni's team will keep mining the deposition for leverage. Because once something like this is on the record, even if it's buried in technical language, it becomes a tool, a weapon, and a headline. And for Baldoni, who has remained relatively quiet Throughout most of the proceedings, this could be the opening his team was waiting for, not because it proves their case, but because it forces the conversation back into ambiguity, where they can reframe the narrative, question the gaps, and demand more transparency. And if that happens, then more documents, more testimony, and more names could surface, and that's the real risk for everyone involved, not just Blake Lively, but anyone who may have been within her circle during the time in question. Because if Baldoni's lawyers believe others acted on her behalf, even indirectly, subpoenas could follow, private texts could become evidence, and the protective wall that usually shields Hollywood elites could begin to crumble. And for those watching from the outside, this is more than just celebrity drama. It's a case study in how influence operates, how silence can be weaponized, and how even a single line in a court document can ignite a media storm and force accountability where it's least expected. And what's more, the industry is watching too. Because if Blake Lively can be pulled into this so publicly, then who's next? What other stars are vulnerable to lawsuits, depositions, and discovery demands? And how many careers could quietly hinge on whether their secrets stay sealed or end up on a judge's desk? And that fear, that possibility, is changing how celebrities approach damage control, public relations, and legal exposure. It's no longer just about statements and stylists, it's about documents and depositions, and who's ready to be transparent when the spotlight turns harsh and unfiltered. And right now, that spotlight is fully on Blake Lively, not just because of what she said or didn't say, but because what she admitted is now officially part of the court's reality. And that means there's no walking it back, no controlling the message, no spinning the facts when they're already embedded in the legal record. And so this case continues evolving, no longer just about one actor versus another, but about the hidden infrastructure of influence and image, the machinery behind the red carpet and the headlines. And with each development, the line between truth and narrative blurs a little more, drawing everyone deeper into a drama that refuses to fade. As the attention surrounding Blake Lively's deposition statement grows, the stakes for everyone involved continue to rise. Because this is no longer just about a defamation suit or even a possible smear campaign. It has become a defining moment where silence is no longer a shield and the courtroom is now a theater for public accountability. The line from her deposition stating that she gave no explicit instruction to smear Justin Baldoni may sound like a relief for her team, but legally, it opens an entire category of implication. Because while an absence of instruction sounds clean and definitive, lawyers know better. They know that actions can be interpreted, intent can be suggested, and responsibility can be distributed without a single word being spoken. And that is what the next phase of this legal drama is likely to explore. Because now the door is open to dig deeper, to explore whether others acted independently or were influenced indirectly. And that is where this case begins to mirror other high-profile legal conflicts, where reputation manipulation happens in whispers and gestures, not emails and contracts. And if Baldoni's team can show a pattern of behavior that aligns with damage to his professional relationships or public image, they could still argue that harm was done, regardless of the explicitness of instruction. And Hollywood is ripe with those kinds of subtleties. A sudden cold shoulder from a major studio, an unreturned call from a producer, a strange shift in media coverage. That all happens without official announcements, but everyone knows where it starts. And that is the terrain now being explored in the wake of Lively's deposition. As she tries to distance herself from direct responsibility, her opponents are likely to comb through every bit of communication, looking for signs that someone in her circle acted in a way that could be seen as retaliatory, dismissive, or undermining to Baldoni. And that becomes even more dangerous if any of those actions can be timed to moments of private conflict or negotiation breakdowns between the two actors, because then causation enters the picture, and the case moves from theoretical harm to measurable impact. And that is where public sympathy can shift to, because audiences are watching this not just as legal observers, but as fans and followers. And when someone perceived as beloved or honest is shown to have possibly orchestrated something behind the scenes, even in subtle ways, the backlash can be immediate and unforgiving. And in this moment, that risk falls heavily on Blake Lively, who has spent years crafting a particular brand of elegance, composure, and discretion. And now all of that is being tested, not in a magazine interview or a red carpet moment, but through court filings and depositions. And if more parts of her testimony are referenced or leaked, the scrutiny will only intensify. And what's striking is that so far she has made no public statement about the court's acknowledgement of her deposition, no rebuttal, no clarification, nothing. And that silence could be interpreted in several ways. Perhaps it is legal strategy. Perhaps she is choosing not to feed the media cycle, or perhaps she knows that anything she says now could be used against her in court, regardless of her intentions. And meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's team appears to be carefully calculating their next steps, aware that public opinion is beginning to sway again, and knowing that even small revelations like this can change the direction of the case. Because it isn't always about winning the lawsuit, sometimes it's about shaping the narrative, influencing the court of public opinion, and applying pressure until a favorable settlement is reached or reputational repair becomes impossible. And that's the reality facing Blake Lively as each day passes without a counter-narrative or a compelling explanation for what has now been confirmed in the court document. And the silence only allows others to shape the story around her. And in Hollywood, that vacuum is quickly filled by tabloids, podcasts, social media, and commentary shows, all of which are already dissecting her deposition line by line, word by word, speculating on what wasn't said just as much as what was. And every interpretation, every theory becomes part of the wider conversation, making it harder and harder for Lively to reclaim the narrative without drastic moves. And as legal experts weigh in, many suggest that if she wants to protect her career and credibility, she may need to provide more context, perhaps not through a press conference, but through carefully released documents or interviews that allow her to shape the story. Again, because right now the only shape it has is the one formed by silence and speculation. And for someone so media savvy, that is a dangerous place to be. And for Baldoni, this development could signal a strategic pivot, perhaps moving from a direct accusation to a broader argument about negligence, about enabling, about standing by while harm was done. And that kind of argument, especially in the era of public accountability, can be just as damaging as a direct claim of wrongdoing, because audiences and juries alike respond emotionally to stories of betrayal, isolation, and passive complicity. And if the evidence even loosely supports that framing, then the pressure on Blake Lively increases, not just in court but across every studio, every brand, every industry event where her name might be associated with the case. And that's the nature of reputational risk in 2025. It's no longer about scandal headlines. It's about legal accountability, social narratives, and digital footprints. And the moment a court document becomes public, it feeds into all of those systems instantly and permanently. And with more media outlets now filing requests for access to the full deposition, or at least the context around the referenced statement, it's likely that more information will emerge. And once that happens, the court of public opinion will react again with louder voices, sharper takes, and deeper divisions. And that's the cycle. This case has now entered a continuous loop of legal discovery, media interpretation, public backlash, and strategic silence, and it will not stop until one side is forced to speak more fully or until the court demands complete transparency. And for now, the person at the center of that storm remains visibly absent. Blake Lively, whose silence was once her greatest asset, may now be working against her. And whether she realizes that or not will determine her next move, because in the legal world and in Hollywood, timing is everything. In this moment, maybe the most critical of her career, as this legal battle continues to unravel, one thing has become clear: the line between courtroom truth and public perception is thinner than ever. And Blake Lively now finds herself walking that line under a spotlight she can no longer dim, with every word from her deposition being picked apart by lawyers, fans, and media alike. The once untouchable image of a private, poised Hollywood icon is being tested in ways no publicist could have prepared for. What began as a controlled legal strategy has spiraled into a storm of speculation. And for Justin Baldoni, the unexpected admission has breathed new life into his case. Even if it is not a direct confession of wrongdoing, it has exposed cracks in the narrative Blake worked so hard to protect. And now the industry is watching not just the outcome of this case, but the long-term effects it may have on careers, relationships, and reputations. Because in Hollywood, perception is reality, and silence is no longer safety. With each new motion, with each referenced line, the story expands, reshapes, and slips further from the control of those who created it. And that is the true consequence of this moment. It is no longer just about winning or losing in court. It is about surviving the aftermath, about what remains when the documents are unsealed, the stories are told, and the truths can no longer be managed. This is the cost of power. When influence turns into evidence, when allies become witnesses, and when the game of image finally meets the rules of law. For Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, this fight is far from over. And for those watching, it is a reminder that even the brightest stars cannot escape the shadows of what lies beneath, and eventually the truth finds its way into the light.